Hi, Funko here. Today I'm going over a deck I've been working on this week, which is Jabba Yellow, aka the anti-Krayt Dragon deck, aka your Krayt Dragon. No, my Krayt Dragon. This green-yellow deck has some fun combos and is relatively cheap with only 3 legendaries in the list. So if you're looking for something fun to take to your next Star Wars Unlimited night, or SWU night, are we calling it SWU? SWU. I think you'll enjoy this one. In this video, I'll be going over the deck list, the decisions behind certain cards that I picked and why, as well as combos you can pull off, lines of play against different meta deck archetypes, and some of the cards that didn't make the cut and some changes that you could make in future if you don't have all the cards exactly. So stick around. I think you'll enjoy it. Okay, first off, the big man, the giant frog, the Wookiee nipple pinchy man himself, Jabba. He's a green villain leader, and his ability is you can exhaust him to give an enemy unit a bounty for this phase that makes the next unit you play cost 1 less. He flips over when you control 7 resources as a 2/12 with a massive booty, and his on-deploy ability is that another friendly unit can capture an enemy unit. And then his action switches to exhaust him to give something a bounty that makes the next unit you play cost 2 less. He's an interesting leader. One of the later ones coming out on 7 resources, so a little later in the game, with an interesting stat line at 2/12. I think that's the biggest toughness hero we have. I think that's correct. And but the main thing about Jabba is that capture. That's the bread and butter of why you're playing Jabba as a leader. His bounties to make things cheaper is nice, but it takes a lot of actions to do. And the main thing is just getting that free capture, because you don't have to spend any resources to do it. You do have to have another unit there. He can't capture it himself, so you have to have another unit, but then you can target anything. Doesn't matter if it's ground or space, doesn't matter how many resources it costs. That unit then captures. So why play Jabba in yellow? Well, the main reason is Dryden Voss. These two together are an incredibly powerful combo that only takes 2 actions to pull off. So once you have 7 resources, you can flip Jabba and capture something. Again, making sure you have another unit, because Jabba can't capture it himself. And then the next action, you play Dryden Voss and you get to put that captured unit into play on your board. This is very powerful because if you look at other capture effects, whether that's events or units that capture, they're going to cost additional resources on top of Dryden 7. So that's a little harder to pull off because you have to capture something 1 turn, then wait a turn, and then play Dryden. This gives your opponent the opportunity to remove that unit through an event or just attacks. Or you have to wait really late until you have, 10, 11, 12 resources, depending on the capture card involved. So being able to flip Jabba, which doesn't cost anything, and then in the next action, play Dryden and put that unit into play is very, very powerful. Taking your opponent's best unit and then getting it yourself can be a massive, massive swing. So this is why it's the anti-Krayt Dragon deck, because flipping Jabba is free, and then once you're playing Dryden after that, the Krayt has already been captured, so you don't incur that Krayt Dragon ability where it damages you or your base. If you look at other ways to deal with Krayt Dragon, like Rival's Fall or Fell the Dragon, or playing another big unit like Devastator, which can blast it for a bunch of damage, you're still going to get hit for damage because of Krayt's ability. Even in that instance, when you remove the Krayt Dragon, the trigger still carries on and resolves afterwards. So you're still going to get dinged for all that damage, which might be enough to kill you. So by flipping Jabba, which doesn't cost anything, you capture the Krayt Dragon to one of your units. You then play Dryden, and because the Krayt is captured, his ability doesn't matter anymore, and then you get to put that Krayt Dragon in play. So now, even if your opponent's playing a deck like Young Han, where he might have another Krayt Dragon to play, they have to deal with your Krayt Dragon first. So that's what makes it the anti-Krayt Dragon deck. Now, you don't necessarily have to do this as soon as you hit 7 resources. You can wait a bit if you feel like there's a big unit coming. You only get to flip Jabba once, so you want to make the most of that. It also doesn't have to be like a massive Krayt Dragon. It could be something that they've just played that really gums up the works. If they've just dropped a massive Sentinel like Obi-Wan Kenobi, and you want to take that so the rest of your board can swing in for a bunch of damage. Or maybe it's a unit in space that they've been loading up with Tarkin experience all game. Now, capturing it means all that experience and upgrades are going to fall off, but at least it deals with it swinging you for, 6+ damage in the air every turn. You know, there are a lot of different ways you can play it. So that is definitely the main reason we're here. It's the most powerful combo on the deck, and it's pretty good. So other than Dryden being in yellow, the other reason to play Jabba yellow is it's just a very strong color combination in the game right now. There was a lot of great cards added in set 2 for Cunning, for the yellow aspect, and in my opinion, it's the strongest color by far. All right, let's look at the deck. So if you just want the deck list, here you go. This is it. You can take this and go play and see what you think. If you want to know my decisions on why certain cards are in here over others and how I like to play the deck, then stick around because we're going to go through that now, and I'll refer back to this list throughout the video. So our goal is to flip Jabba, take their unit, and play Dryden so that we get to play their unit. Okay, so let's start with how we get to 7 resources to pull off the Jabba-Dryden combo. The short answer is we ramp. We play Resupply, we play Super Laser Technician. These are great ways that have been around since set 1 to ramp up your deck quickly. I did look at some other ramp options like the Bounty upgrade Price on Your Head or using Command, but because we're in yellow, we'd have to pay 6 for that. And they just didn't feel that great. There is also an issue where if you have too much ramp in the deck, at a certain point, you don't need the ramp anymore, and it can kind of impact your earlier draws, which against aggro decks means that you just get run over before you get to playing all your good stuff. So in the end, I liked the Resupply Super Laser Tech combo, especially because Super Laser Tech is a body that you get to play down, and the resource comes in readied, which is unique compared to the other ramp options. So there is instances where if you can play Super Laser Tech one turn, next turn, run that into their unit to kill it, you have that resource available straight away to use, which is really nice. So part of the plan to get to 7 resources is also to survive until we have 7 resources. And against aggro decks, that can be tricky when they're just trying to rush you down. So cards like Frozen in Carbonite and No Good to Me Dead help us slow things down and survive until we can get some of those bigger threats out. Notably, No Good to Me Dead can hit leaders. So on turn 3, when Sabine and Kylo flip, you can just hit them with a No Good to Me Dead and delay them for 2 turns. Frozen in Carbonite can't go attached to leaders, but you can put it on ships in space, which is a little odd, but it works. So both of these cards help us slow down their board and buy us some time to both ramp and get our bigger threats out to deal with them. Now, it's important to note, Frozen in Carbonite is an upgrade, so things like Fang Fighters, Poe Damerons, on attack ability, any kind of upgrade hate, are able to free those units and get the Frozen in Carbonite off them, but they don't ready straight away. So it does still work with delaying that damage, which is serving its purpose. Next, we need to look at the early units. It's important to have enough cards that we have a turn 1 play. The worst thing to do is to draw a hand, have to mulligan, and then still have nothing to do on turn 1. Especially against some of the faster decks, that's going to spell almost certain death. So we have 10 cards, which is a good sweet spot for making sure we draw something to do on the first turn. Gamorrean Retainer is a contentious card. It's a 3/2 for 2, and it does trade badly into things like Crafty Smuggler or various other 2-power units. However, I like it because it can also trade up. It does have 3 power, and later in the game, you can drop it if you have another green unit and it becomes a Sentinel. So early on turns 1, 2, and 3, this probably doesn't matter that much, but later game, it can serve a purpose. And I really like those early game cards where they're a good turn 1 play, but also you draw them later in the game, there is still a use for them. You could also use something like a Seasoned Shore Trooper instead, which is a 2/3, and then later in the game can get +2 power if you have 6 resources or more. That's also a good option, and it serves the same purpose of being good early, but also having some payoff later. I personally like the Gamorrean because there are plenty of instances where you want that 3 power. I did toy with the idea of Colonel Yularen instead of Gamorrean Retainer, who is a 2/3 green card that you gain health every time you play a green unit. Ultimately, I didn't go with this. We don't have a massive amount of green units compared to something like Palpatine or Tarkin, where the healing will matter more. And also, him being an official doesn't really matter for this deck, whereas it does for something like Palpatine, who wants to run Emperor's Royal Guard. But that is another card you could choose. Colonel Yularen would probably also work in a pinch. Next, we have Greedo, who's a 3/1 for 1 and has a death trigger where you can flip the top of your deck, and if it's a non-unit, you can deal 2 damage to something. We're only running 14 non-unit cards in this deck, so that's not often likely to happen. So Greedo's just fine. He does have synergies, being an Underworld card with Mar Clunky and with Maul's on attack ability later. But again, he has 3 power. He can trade up into things. He's fine. Another option for a turn 1 play is Bazine Natal. Now, Bazine's an interesting card. I think she's very, very useful. She's great because she can be smuggled and played later as well. I think she's better as a mid to late game play than she is for a turn 1 play. You can play Bazine on turn 1 and potentially look at their hand and ditch their only turn 1 play, which might put them in a weird spot. But I think she's way better in the late game when they have much fewer cards in hand and you maybe can grab something that's really vital for their plan. But if I have the choice between other turn 1 plays and Bazine, I'm probably going to resource Bazine and then smuggle her out later to get more payoff from her effect. She's also an Underworld card, so again, the synergy with Marklunki, you can return her to your hand, deal something 3 damage from Marklunki, and then play her out again at some point to attack their hand again. Really nice card and very useful either early game or late game. Now we also have Reputable Hunter here, which is a 3-cost unit, but remember, Jabba can use an action to put a bounty onto an enemy unit, and then Reputable Hunter comes down as a 2-cost with power 3, toughness 4, which is really nice. Reputable Hunter is also a bounty hunter, so later when we talk about Relentless Pursuit, there's some synergies there where he can capture something and get a shield for being a bounty hunter. This card is very good in Jabba, especially if you have a couple of these in hand. During testing, there were times when on turn 3, when I had 4 resources, I used Jabba to put a bounty on something and then played 2 of these guys. So for 4 resources, we got 2 separate 3/4 bodies on the board, which is really nice. Moving into our turn 2 onward sort of cards, we have Hunter of the Haxian Brood, which has a lot of synergies with Jabba. If you have a bounty on an enemy unit, Hunter of the Haxian Brood comes down with a shield as a 4/3 shielded unit, which is incredibly good. Again, is a bounty hunter, so gets that benefit from Relentless Pursuit, and is just a very useful unit to kind of clear out some of those early aggro units with the shield, and then stay alive to keep fighting and clear something else out. Lurking TIE Phantom is in here as a nice little space 3-drop. It's an interesting card that is quite hard to deal with. If they don't have space units to kill it in combat, it can kind of just do work in space. Now, this was Consortium Star Viper at a certain point because I wanted the healing to kind of last longer against aggro, but Lurking TIE Phantom is kind of annoying to deal with for some decks, and is also a great target for your capture cards, because they can't just use an event to remove it. So things like Relentless Pursuit or even the Jabba capture in a pinch can go under the TIE Phantom because they can't then just blast it with a removal spell. So it's not really something we're building around, but it is just a useful space unit. And a lot of the time when people see that now, it's a bit of a boogeyman that they feel like they have to deal with, which can distract and let some of our other units survive a bit longer. Now you might be saying, you've only got 1 space unit so far. Aren't you just going to get chewed up in the sky? Well, to deal with space units, we have Overwhelming Barrage. We're playing villain green, so we play Overwhelming Barrage. That's one of the main reasons to be in those color types. Overwhelming Barrage is a great removal for space units. Space units, the stat costs are a little lower than ground, so you can quite easily get away with pinging things for 1 and 2 damage and blow them up. It also lets our ground unit get bigger and swing in for more damage, or maybe trade up. You can also use it to just pop a bunch of shields, which is useful as well. Overwhelming Barrage is a fantastic card. It's one of the most powerful cards in the game when used right. It's good if we play it on 5 on a smaller unit. It's great if we play it late game on some of our bigger units that we'll talk about in a sec. Really, really powerful, and it helps kind of clear out the skies so we don't have to worry about it. Our mid-game units are Forlom, Syndicate Lackeys, and arguably Maul, even though he is a 7-cost unit. All of these units have ambush, so that lets us get in and trade off their board, hopefully favorably, where they kill something and survive on 1 or 2 HP, and then hopefully get to trade into something else. They're also all Underworld units, so they synergize with Marklunki to return them to hand and get to ambush again. As they're Underworld, they can be targets for Maul's on-attack ability and take that damage for him. And Forlom is a bounty hunter, so we can use Relentless Pursuit to capture something and he'll get shielded as well. You might be saying, well, I see Forlom, so where's his buddy Zuckuss? We're not playing Zuckuss because we're in a yellow base. I think Forlom rarely survives long enough to give Zuckuss ambush when you play him. And without Energy Conversion Lab to give Zuckuss ambush, I think he's just pretty underwhelming. He's a big body, but he costs 6 and then he hits the board and does nothing for a turn. And I think without ambush, that's pretty rough. You know, compare Poe Dameron with ambush, getting in for 8 damage, versus Poe Dameron sitting there for a turn before he does anything and just dies. I think if we had Energy Conversion Lab as our base and we're able to give Zuckuss ambush, that would be completely different. But in yellow, I'm not a huge fan. Now, Maul is a 7-drop, so not exactly a mid-game unit, but considering we're ramping and with Jabba's bounty ability, we can make the next unit we play cheaper. We can get him down to 6 cost and see him a lot earlier than other decks would. So the good thing about Maul is with his ambush and overwhelm, he becomes a form of reach, of being able to put damage on the base without the opponent expecting it. And especially if you can ambush him into a very small unit, most of his damage goes through on overwhelm. 7 power coming out of nowhere is just very versatile. Maul's on-attack ability is really useful in this deck. Being able to redirect the damage he would take to an underworld unit can be really important to keeping him alive. Things that we can hit would be Greedo. We could hit Hunter of the Haxian Brood if they have a shield, so it just ignores the damage. If Jabba's out, Jabba is an underworld unit, and he has 12 health, so you can put the damage Maul would take onto him, which is great. Maul is also a green unit, which will turn on Gamorrean Retainer's Sentinel ability and help Maul survive a little longer from getting attacked back. Another late game unit is Jabba's Rancor, which I learned has a name, is named Patissa. I didn't know that till I saw this card. It is an 8-drop, so it's a pretty late game unit, but the text on the card explains that because we have Jabba as our leader, we get a 1 cost reduction in that, so it's 7. And then we can again use Jabba's bounty ability to get that cost reduced further, so it could come in as early as a 6-drop. You do have to be careful when you play Jabba's Rancor, because when you play it, it damages another unit you control for 3 and an enemy unit for 3, as well as when it attacks. It's important to note, in Star Wars Unlimited, the golden rule is do as much as you can when it comes to card abilities. So when Jabba's Rancor says that you damage another friendly unit for 3 and an enemy unit for 3, if you don't have any other units on the board, you don't have to damage anything. But if they have enemy units, you still get to damage theirs. And vice versa is true. So if they have no enemy units, but you have friendly units, you still have to damage your unit, even though there's nothing to swing at on the enemy's board. At 9 power, 9 toughness, he's a big old boy and is a great target for capturing a unit with Jabba, because he's very likely to survive any attempts to kill it before you can play Dryden, or for overwhelming barrage, jumping his power up to 11 and letting you ping everything on the board for 11 damage. So just a great big honking unit to really help things out in the late game. Another great late game unit in the deck is the Reinforcement Walker. This helps us heal on play and on attack. So it helps us stabilize against some of the aggressive decks that might be trying to put those last few points of damage into our base, as well as helping with card draw if we don't need to heal. Reinforcement Walker is also another great target for capturing because it has a massive 9 toughness, so it's likely to survive against most attacks and give you time to play Dryden and get to play that captured unit. And also we have Dryden, who's here for the late game. Obviously, we're looking to play out the unit we capture from Jabba or something from Relentless Pursuit. We have 3 Drydens in the deck to make sure that we have him when we want to flip Jabba, as well as potentially getting some extra value if we capture something with Relentless Pursuit and then get to play Dryden out. It's a little awkward to do that in the same turn, just because Dryden costs 7 and Relentless Pursuit costs 3. But if we're able to use Relentless Pursuit to capture something under the TIE Phantom, it might stick around long enough to then play Dryden the next turn and get to play that unit. He also comes down shielded as a 5/7, so he's just useful in combat too. Finally, at the top end of the deck, we have a single copy of Relentless. This is just there to make things a little awkward for control decks that want to claim and then super laser blast your whole board. It just makes it a little harder for them to get that off. And then against aggressive decks, you'll probably just resource this early because the game won't go that long and the blocking events part doesn't matter. Now, the sideboard options are still a work in progress, so rather than talk about specific side this card in for this and things like that, I'm going to talk more generally about the strategies you should take against different common deck archetypes. Against aggressive decks like Sabine, Kylo, Grand Inquisitor, we want to slow them down. The longer the game goes, the better our deck gets, so we want to use cards like Frozen in Carbonite and No Good to Me Dead to just kind of delay the damage and live long enough to get those big threats out. What we don't want is to finally pull off our Jabba Dryden flip combo and then immediately die on the next action because we only had 4 HP left. So this is where swapping out the Lurking TIE Phantom for a Consortium Star Viper that'll let us get some heals off will help. And remember, when those early leaders like Sabine and Kylo flip, hit them with the No Good to Me Dead and delay them for 2 turns. That's really going to slow their damage down. A very popular deck archetype at the moment is the Oops All Space deck with Tarkin Yellow, and there's a Boba version that kind of load up ships into space centered around the Lurking TIE Phantom, putting a bunch of experience on them and making it very hard to deal with. Against these decks, we're on a similar strategy. We want to use Frozen in Carbonite and No Good to Me Dead to slow them down. We can also look at siding out the Super Laser Technician because they may not have ground units for us to run it into, and instead switch that for Waylay to bounce things back to their hand. So if they want to load up a small ship with a bunch of experience, we can then tap that down with Frozen in Carbonite so they can't ready it. We can bounce it back to their hand with Waylay. We can look at using things like Relentless Pursuit to capture it, because when you capture a unit, all the upgrades and experience they've put on it fall off. So even if they can kill your thing that captured it and get it back, they have to go through all that work again of building it back up. All of those cards go to delaying that deck long enough that you can get your big units out, you can get your Reinforcement Walkers healing you up, you can get your big Rancors and Mauls swinging in for a bunch of damage, and hopefully take them down that way. You can also use Overwhelming Barrage to kind of clear out those smaller space units and swing in for big damage on the ground as well. Against mid-range decks or tempo decks, we're really just looking to ramp up to our big threats before they do, and then use Capture and then the Dryden Flip to then play those units for ourselves and hope that's enough to get us over the line. Against hard control and those blue archetypes, we don't really need to change the deck much. We're just looking to ramp and get our units out before theirs. We have Relentless to protect against a big Super Laser Blast, and we can use the Dryden Jabba Flip combo to steal big units and play them for ourselves. So the strategy for that is really just to do what our deck wants to do anyway. I will say I haven't had a chance to play this deck in person yet. I had to order some cards to fill out the deck, and I'm still waiting for them to arrive. So all the testing I've been doing has been done on Karabast, which you kind of have to take with a grain of salt. Karabast is a great way to get quick games in online, but the people playing there didn't have to buy the cards, they didn't have to drive out to their LGS, so there's no real investment in the games there, so they can just quit and start another game if they don't like the way things are going. And they're most often best of one, which is important in competitive play because the sideboard changes you make between rounds really do matter. So I think it's important to remember that Karabast isn't the same as going to your store and playing against someone who's constructed their deck and bought all the cards and gone there. They're going to be much more invested in playing well and finishing out a game, whereas someone on Karabast who, if they have a bad turn 3, might just go, screw it, I'm going to quit. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, honorable mentions for some cards I tested along the way while building this deck, but ended up cutting. So there were some few different early game units I messed around with. The Cloud Rider as a 3/1 with Ambush was interesting, but I found that late game I kind of preferred having a Gamorrean Sentinel or a Bazine to attack their hand more than like a baby ambush unit. But there's definitely an argument for using it. It can be very useful to get that 3 damage out of nowhere. Dr. Evazan was a good, strong early game unit, a 3/3 with a shield, but the bounty there of your enemy being able to ready up to 12 resources is incredibly risky. If you're not able to trade him in at the start of the turn before they've spent anything, even letting them play a 3-drop and then letting them kill him and play another 3-drop is pretty bad. So if they leave him around until later in the game and they're readying 6, 7, 8 resources off killing him, that's a huge swing and it's a very risky play. Ultimately, I decided that it was too risky, and late game, I never wanted to play this unit. So again, I'm looking for early units that are both useful early as well as late, and Evazan just becomes a liability later in the game. The other ramp that I tried was Command, but because it's a double-costed green card and wearing green-yellow, we would be playing that for 6, and Command for 6 just doesn't feel good. I think some of the other double-costed cards like Cunning and Vigilance make sense at 6 because they're just so good, but Aggression and Command especially, I don't think are worth it for 6, especially in the deck with what we want to do. The options being put 2 experience on something is kind of minor. Being able to deal damage to a unit is good, but it's non-unique unit. And there's a lot of really good unique units that we'd like to damage, and we can't do that with this card. The ramp is good, but if we're paying 6 to do it, that's pretty late, and we want to have already ramped by then, and I just think it's a bit underwhelming at a 6-drop. The recursion of getting something out of the graveyard and getting it back to our hand is very nice, but again, it costs 6 to do it, so it just felt really clunky, and I ended up cutting it. I did also test the Discerning Veteran, which is the 5-drop 3/4 that lets you capture a ground unit, especially with Dryden and getting more captures rather than relying on the Jabba Flip to see if we could put the units into play. I ended up cutting it for a couple of reasons. It's a 3/4, so it doesn't end up surviving that long. A lot of the time you'll capture something and then they'll just immediately kill it to get it back again. And it only captures things in the ground arena, which limits it somewhat. So at 5 cost, it just didn't really feel right. And finally, I was going back and forth between Devastator and Relentless at the top end of the deck. Devastator does have some things going for it. Its main thing is being able to blast something for 10 damage when you play it. It does have Overwhelm, so it's really good as a finisher. It has Sentinel, which might help you survive to finish them. So ultimately, I decided to switch it for Relentless just to protect against those hard control matchups a little better. And half the time we're playing against an aggressive deck and we're just going to resource both these cards anyway because the game's going to be over long before we get to play them. So there's definitely an argument for one or the other, and you could probably switch this out based on your local meta. So that's Jabba Yellow. Let me know in the comments below what you think of the deck. Do you think I should have put one card in instead of something else? I'm interested to hear your thoughts. This was my first experience building a deck from scratch. I usually just use other decks people have put online. And I'm very excited to take this to my Star Wars locals once a few last cards that I need arrive. So I'm keen to see how it does against some of the better players in my local meta here. So if you like this deck and want to see more from me when it comes to Star Wars Unlimited, make sure you subscribe below and hit the like button because it's free to do and it helps support me grow the channel. So I really appreciate it. In the meantime, make sure you drink water, stretch, and get to bed on time, and I'll see you next time.